Hello everyone, welcome to HIM 225. This is a continuation of the lectures for Chapter 22 in your textbook. Please turn to page 543. And we're talking about code 094, which is the sequela of a complication of pregnancy, childbirth, and the puerperium. Now, in the index, if we go to sequela and then pregnancy, you will see that it sends us to this code 094. It's a 3-digit code. We need to be sure that we look at all of our instructional notes here. Let's look at the chapter notes. Basically, we've looked at these before, and it tells us that these codes can only be applied to codes related to obstetrical patients. But you'll see a note here, and it tells us that this category is used to indicate conditions within this obstetrical chapter as the cause of late effects. So the terms sequela and late effect can be used interchangeably. The sequela includes conditions specified as such or as a late effect, which can occur at any time after the puerperium. And we also have an instructional note here to code first the condition that resulted from the sequela or the complication of pregnancy, childbirth, and the puerperium. Now, in this second example on page 543, the patient presents to the physician office complaining of painful intercourse. The medical term for this is dyspareunia. And you can see it that I have it here on the screen. She's 6 months postpartum. So the obstetrician determines that the patient is suffering from a late effect of the repair of the perineum. So basically, when the obstetrician performed the episiotomy, basically it was what they refer to as too tight. So you go to dyspareunia of a female, N9410, and this is the principal diagnosis code here. We can see it in the tabular, no particular notes that apply to this, but then we are also applying the code for the late effect, 094, and you remember we went to sequela, pregnancy to find that code 094. Now we also have an external cause code listed here. So let's go to the external cause. And what we have is a complication of a surgical operation. And it is, when we look at our options here, ours is specified NEC Y83.8. And when we study external cause codes, we'll talk about your facility policy for using them. Now, the next guideline we're talking about is retained products of conception following an abortion. And the guideline tells us that if we have subsequent encounters or retained products of conception following a spontaneous abortion or elective termination of pregnancy without complications, then we are going to assign the appropriate code from category 003.4 or 007.4. A failed attempted termination of a pregnancy without complication. And we're also going to assign the code for Z33.2, encounter for elective termination of pregnancy. This advice is appropriate even when a patient was discharged previously with a diagnosis of a complete abortion. If the patient has a specific complication that's associated with the spontaneous abortion or the elective termination of pregnancy, in addition to the retained products of conception, then we're going to assign the appropriate complication code from either one of those categories, rather from either O03 or O07 instead of the code O03.4 or O07.4. So let's take a look at these. Now, just to go back and clarify, O03 is the category for a spontaneous abortion. O07 is the category for a failed attempted termination of pregnancy. So let's look at spontaneous abortion. And it tells us that this is an incomplete abortion, and it includes retained products of conception following a spontaneous abortion. So the patient has a spontaneous abortion, they go home, the physician thinks that it is a complete spontaneous abortion, but they go home, they maybe bleed or develop an infection, and they determine that in fact they had retained products of conception. Now, the codes in this category are very specific to different types of complications. You can see that this is a genitalia tract and pelvic infection following an incomplete spontaneous abortion. Here we have delayed or excessive hemorrhage. We have an embolism, other and unspecified complication following an incomplete spontaneous abortion, shock. Then we have renal failure, metabolic disorders, damage to pelvic organs. So you can see that we have a number of complications listed in this particular category. Now, when we look at O03.4, this code is an incomplete spontaneous abortion without complication. So we're only using this code if in fact this is without complication. So we're only using this code for a patient who came in and had an incomplete abortion, and there's no other complication documented, okay? Now I want to go and look at category O07. This is a failed attempted termination of pregnancy. So basically the patient came in to have an abortion, and it was a failed attempted termination of pregnancy. And there can be a number of problems with that. The patient maybe delivers a live infant, and we'll look at that in a few minutes. But you'll see that the same complications are included in this category as in the O03. And if we look at O07.4, we can see that is failed attempted termination of pregnancy without complication. So that means there was no other complication for this patient. Now, with both of these categories, if there was any documented complication, then you would not be using the code that ends in .4. You would be using the code for the specific complication. So you can't use them together. I hope that's not too thoroughly confusing. Now, in the index, I want to show you how to find these codes. So if we go to retained, and we look through here, there isn't anything specific to products of conception, but it says see also retention. So we'll go to retention, and you'll notice down here that you can scroll down and you can find placenta and then products of conception. These are not the right codes. If you go to these codes and try to look up these codes, this is postpartum hemorrhage. That we don't have a postpartum hemorrhage. We didn't have a delivery. To find these codes, you have to go to abortion. And you can see if we look at abortion with retained products of conception, it tells us to see abortion incomplete. And for a spontaneous incomplete abortion, it sends you to that code 003.4. And for the failed attempted abortion in the index, we go to abortion attempted. So elective, failed, and it sends us to that code 007.4. Now in the index, if you're looking for an elective abortion, those are induced abortions. And so in the index, you have to go to abortion induced and counter for. So this code Z33.2 is the code that we use when a patient comes in for an elective termination of pregnancy. And then you can see these complication codes that are also associated with this category 004. Let's look at that category. Just get over that particular category. And you can see that this is complications following an induced termination of pregnancy. And as we look through these particular subterms, we can see that they are the specific types of complications that we saw in category 003 and 007. And we can see that we do have a code for induced termination of pregnancy with other complications. So we have all of those same terms listed here, but we don't have 004.4. This category begins at 004.5. Now I want you to look at this last example on page 543. Retained products of conception after a spontaneous abortion, 8 weeks gestation. The products of conception were initially passed at home and a D&C was performed. So this is an example of an 003.4. It is an incomplete abortion. We use that code 003.4. Now the other thing that I want to point out to you is that on the abortion codes, there is no weeks of gestation added to these codes, no weeks of gestation for these termination codes. And then the patient had a dilatation and curettage. So let's go over and look up that procedure code. And we can look up curettage, and this is an extraction. They are extracting products of conception. So if we go to extraction, products of conception, you'll see retained. So we have our code 10D. This is via natural or artificial opening. These are, I've never known of one that was endoscopic. And then there's no device. Sometimes they will tell you that it was manual, but usually it's no qualifier. So you would just read the report carefully to determine if there was a qualifier or if they tell you that it was a manual extraction. Now on the bottom of page 543, they do tell you that you can use codes from chapter 15 for documented complications in conjunction with these codes from 004, 007, and 008. And on the top of page 544, this is a guideline about abuse in pregnant patients. And this tells us that if there is suspected or confirmed abuse of a pregnant patient, then we are going to assign codes from subcategories 09A.3 physical abuse, 09A.4 sexual abuse, 09A.5 psychological abuse, followed by the appropriate codes if it's applicable to assign the perpetrators. And those perpetrator codes are actually external cause codes, and we'll go over those when we're talking about external cause codes. In this example, a patient's admitted at 37 weeks in active labor. She was physically abused by her spouse. She has a normal vaginal delivery. Well, because she's been physically abused, we cannot use the delivery code of 080. So in the index, we're going to pregnancy complicated by abuse. And she may have had physical, psychological, and sexual abuse. We're going to look at physical abuse. And we have, for this particular category, we don't have any notes for the entire category, but when we get to abuse, 09A3, we have, that tells us to use an additional code for the current injury, if the patient has injuries and the documented injuries, and then of course we use the perpetrator code, and then we have an excludes note too. So that means that if we had sex abuse, that we could also add the code for that. Now you'll notice that these codes are based on trimester, and so we also add those codes. Now you'll also notice that we have codes that relate to complicating the childbirth or complicating the puerperium. And in our example in the book, our patient delivered. So we have 09A.32, which is complicating the childbirth. So if they do not deliver, you specify the trimester. If they deliver, you use the code for complicating the childbirth. Now, in addition to that, we do use the Z code for the week's gestation. We also use the Z code for the outcome of the delivery. Then we have the perpetrator code, and then we have the code for the manually assisted delivery. Your question for this lecture is from exercise 22.4, and you're answering question number 13. And 22.4 is on page 557. You're answering question number 13. That will conclude lecture 8, and you will have one more lecture for this particular chapter.